I looked at this image and thought to myself, Jesus Mary, what a nightmare, what an ugly nightmare. Not only was it ugly, but the image had been enlarged. Because the recess of the altar was semicircular and the image itself was rectangular in nature, someone had added a semicircular portion of canvas to it. Fortunately, this was on a separate stretcher, and so it was not a problem for me. There was slack in the image and it was full of putties that had been repainted. There was also some whitewashing and stains, and the face resembled a strange-looking bearded priest. I sighed, "Oh dear Mother of God." Faustina was present when this image was painted, and she cried when she saw him. But what a cry it must have been. I imagined the painting and found that the image was heavily repainted, and not only once, but most likely several times. Also, since it had dried out and had begun to crack, someone had saturated it with wax, which was a very popular technique in those places. It was a yellowish-green color. I said, well, there is a lot of work to do. The painting is relatively young, only from the 1930s. If such a relatively recent painting has gone through such an ordeal, then the restoration would be very difficult. It was stretched over several canvases and it had been subject to constant temperature and humidity fluctuations. It had been rolled up in the attic, and that was the worst thing that could have happened to it. But thankfully, it survived.
Przecież był zrolowany na strychu i to było najgorsze, co mogło go spotkać, ale znowu dzięki temu on przetrwał.
One had to start by removing the coating on the surface. This was a very dangerous procedure because if the painting was made in 1934 and repainted in the 1950s, the time difference is negligible. 20 years is nothing. The solubility of the paint layer and that of the surface coat would be the same. It needs to be removed millimeter by millimeter. It is wise to start the repainting in less noticeable places, usually on the edges of the painting. The repainting over the face was of very good quality, if it were not the fact, as I would soon discover, that it looked completely different from the original. I removed the surface coat from half of the face, that is how it is always done, then proceeded to take a picture. When I went with the camera to the picture, I saw that the right side of the face had completely a different expression. The gaze of each eye was different and the lips were also completely different. I removed the rest of the overcoat and saw a completely different face. When the conservation work was approaching the end, the image was already located in the chapel, and no one observed it except the sisters, of course for the reasons of safety. The sisters arrived. Urszula Grzegorczyk came as well. She saw the image with the restored face, and as she was standing, looking completely silent, she said that this face looked just like Christ from the Holy Shroud of Turin.
Po raz pierwszy na tą zbieżność zwrócił uwagę ojciec Serafin Michalenko.
For the first time, this similarity was noticed by Father Serafin Michalenko, who showed me the effect of comparing both images, which was done at his request in the 1990s. The results of my anthropological studies of the two faces from both images show a complete convergence with such characteristic facial points as the middle part of the eyebrows, the base of the nose, the cheekbones, jaws, the wings of the nose, the beginning of the upper and lower lip, and chin. It's worth analyzing the same details by observing the images in 3 dimensions. It is a face model created by Professor Miniaro in 2002, based on the measurements of the Shroud of Turin and the veil from Oviedo. The veil of Oviedo is the object that covered the face of Jesus when the body was still hanging on the cross, and this veil remained there on the face until the body was placed on the shroud. Then the veil was removed and the body was covered with the shroud. Traces of blood on the shroud and veil give us full information of how the face of Jesus looked like. I put all 3 images on each other, and it turned out that the 8 points determining the most characteristic features of the face perfectly matched.
Myślę też, że warto zobaczyć to w szerszym nieco planie.
I also think that it is worth seeing it from a wider perspective, when we do not limit ourselves to such a fragment of the Shroud of Turin. If we put Kazimierowski's painting here, just bringing it to the proportions you can see on the Shroud of Turin. Of course, nowadays such a proportional mapping of the image from the shroud would not be a problem. It would be enough to project the image from the shroud onto the canvas and the effect would have been obtained mechanically. However, as we know, Kazimierowski did not use such a technique. His painting, therefore, was made, one could say, in an intuitive way. He only followed the instructions of Faustina, who told him how she had seen Jesus. If you wanted to apply the probability calculus, you would have to do at least 1,000 face images to finally get proportions such as the ones on the shroud. This means that we cannot talk about accidental action here.
It is hereby made known that the Supreme Congregation of the Holy Office, having examined the visions and revelations